Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. We're going to take a break from some of our Unified Minds Worlds decks today because we're going to be looking at the Dream League expansion SM11B for Japan, coming out next week on August the 2nd. It's basically the same set release date as our Unified Minds set. But it's also going to be, one of these ones to look out for, as it will be becoming part of our future sets for us. So something to bear in mind. Let's do our usual thing of jumping down to the bottom, getting towards those trainers, because those are always the most interesting ones to look at from my perspective, because not only does it affect potential new cards that we're getting, but also like decks that we already know and love. So that will give us a good baseline as to the power level of current decks, as well as the ones coming out, when we can bear in mind the sort of combos we have available to us with the new card pool. So we'll start with Lana's Fishing Rod. It allows you to shuffle a Pokemon and a tool from your discard pile into your deck. So this is some Pokemon recovery, which is definitely necessary for the format that we're in right now. Because at the moment it's Brock's Grit and not much else. Shuffling only one Pokemon back into the deck is very slow. Comparing it to something like Super Rod or Rescue Stretcher, really terrible comparison because the amount of Pokemon you can get back in is very low. And obviously Rescue Stretcher was far more immediate. The upside though is you can get some tools back, which is pretty cool actually. Because, getting back tools is very difficult to come by. So far we've had like Eco Arm and stuff way back when, but that's really, really rare. And there are some specific tools that you might want to recycle. Spell Tag is a very good one right now. Hustle Belt in some key decks as well, like Spiritomb, for example. That could really appreciate Lana's Fishing Rod or two in the list. So I think it'll be one of these cards that sees niche uses. I don't think it'll see enough play as like a general card like the Super Rods or the Rescue Stretchers of the world. It's not quite on that power level, much more niche overall. We get Lily's Clefairy, which I think is a very strong card. It's a item card that you are allowed to play as if it was a 30 hit point colorless basic, and anytime during your turn you may put this card on the bottom of your deck and discard all cards attached to it. This is far better than the old Robo Sub card that we used to have, because that card was the same hit points and obviously doesn't give up a prize card when it gets knocked out, but you would have to discard it from play if you wanted to move it essentially out of your active. But this time you can put it to the bottom of your deck instead, so you can recycle this card, which is really, really awesome. It means that it's effectively a free retreater for you. Obviously, it goes to the bottom of the deck, so you'd have to go about trying to find it all over again. But this is way stronger than Robo Sub, and Robo Sub was pretty much the face of like hit and run decks. He sort of made that a mainstream thing. Like Donphan was a very powerful deck for a good amount of time. There was a handful of other decks trying to do a similar hit and run approach, like Gengar and stuff. So I think Clefairy could end up being, again, sort of breathing life into these hit and run style decks. There's not many hit and run style attackers that we have right now. There's things like Hitmonchan, which is pretty weak on the power level. We need to have some more damage modification to make him stronger. And there aren't many other hit and run options out there right now. But it's just one of these cards that becomes an enabler for a hit and run style approach, especially with the lack of gust that we have in format. It could be like a really deadly archetype, very, very difficult to get through if we actually have an attacker that does enough damage overall. So just an army of Lily's Clefairy could be enough to win games if your opponent isn't playing enough gusting effects. So it's actually a very scary card, very, very scary card, really, really strong. And it will be the face of hit and run if we get a better attacker than Hitmonchan, I think. Will is a new supporter that says, after playing this card, the first time you flip a coin, for the effect of a trainer, an ability, or an attack during this turn, you may choose the result of the coin flip. So in theory, you're manipulating the coin flip in your favor. Usually you want heads flips for a lot of situations. But it's just trying to make the most out of some cool trainers or abilities or whatnot. Overall, there's a lot of applications for this. I haven't looked into all of them in great detail. But the only thing I will say is this is very situational, because you're spending your support of a turn to not do a lot. So, yeah, like you're not drawing cards, so you need to already have your whole setup on board ready to go, and you're hoping that your coin flip of whatever it is is going to be worth it. It wouldn't be worth it for things like an order pad or whatever, because then Will is just essentially a Skylar for like less versatile and stuff like that. So it has to be better than things like order pads and stuff, and those are some of the best coin flips. Super Scoop Up is one that comes to mind. Like, that's actually a very good coin flip outcome. Will then becomes like a 2-card version of Acerola, which is pretty bad, but it's still like one of the better trainers you could use. For attacks. That nothing like springs to mind as like, oh my god, I need this to flip heads, but there's obviously some upsides that you can get out of heads flips with attacks here and there, and makes some of these attacks like less risky, I guess, which is kind of cool. But again, it feels really situational, and you need to have a good draw engine backing Will to be a useful card. Let me know what your favorite applications are for this one, because I've not looked into it in great detail just yet. I'm just sort of snowballing my first impressions, and obviously when it comes to a full set review, I'll give it more time. Ends Resolve is a very interesting supporter card, allowing you to discard the top 6 cards of your deck, and then you can attach all basic energy cards discarded in this way to one of your benched dragon Pokemon. So this harps back to essentially Max Elixir, now in supporter form, but the upside of getting every energy that you catch in those top 6. So pretty high rolly, pretty like scary card to use as well, because you're having to discard whatever else is there. So it's like using 2 Stormy Winds, basically, in a supporter. And as we know, Dragon Pokemon do usually have expensive, annoying attack costs of multiple energy counts in them. So using an Ends Resolve to try and fulfill those attack costs could be really cool. Could be great for a Turbo Rayquaza deck. Could be really strong with a new Dragon GX that we'll look at later on in this set. I think that is where Ends Resolve will definitely see a place, because it's really good to be using it with the new tag team that we have. But yeah, I think it's powerful. Getting basics into play, basic energies into play is really good. The discard factor is scary. Maybe some manipulation of the top of your deck could be in order here to make Ends Resolve stronger. But I think a lot of the time you take that risk. Like, I think they've learned that Max Elixir was too strong of a card, and they don't want to print something like that ever again. But Ends Resolve is probably pushing it as far as they can for this sort of energy acceleration for Dragon types. We then have Roxy. This is a supporter that allows you to discard up to 2 Pokemon from your hand, excluding GXs or EXs, and for each one you discarded, you draw 3 cards. I think this is pretty low on the power level. There are some good synergistic cards. There's a couple from the set that specifically name if they're discarded from Roxy, you can do something. So that's something to bear in mind for later. And it may be reasonable for decks that pack their build with a bunch of Pokemon. Things like Persian GX decks, potentially. But that's not really like a mainstream archetype by any means. So I don't think there's too many decks that are going to completely pack the deck out with stuff, but being able to effectively draw 6 cards deep is not too shabby. You probably have to be a fully non-GX deck to try and consider Roxy, but usually, because we have such poor Pokemon recovery right now, you don't ever want to get rid of Pokemon. So I think Roxy is glamorous, but pretty poor overall. I don't think she's that good. Also, I don't think it brings back Wheezing as an archetype. I'll just say that now. But yeah, it also is like a massive upgrade to... I can't remember what supporter it was. There was a supporter that makes you discard like a Loam Pokemon, I think it is. Or it makes you discard... Oh no, it's Ultra Recon Squad, right? That's what it is. It's like a massive upgrade to Ultra Recon Squad, so rip that card. Rosa is a very interesting supporter. It's kind of like a throwback to Teammates. One of my favorite cards ever, actually. It has that same text where you can only pay if one of your Pokemon was knocked out during your opponent's last turn. And it says you can search your deck for a Pokemon, a trainer, and a basic energy, reveal them and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. Now, comparing this card directly to Teammates shapes up pretty poorly, I want to say. It's annoying that it's only special energy. If it was just energy, it would look like a much stronger card. Because we really are lacking search for special energies right now. And there are some like clutch special energies out there, but just getting basic energies isn't really a big deal. I don't think any deck really struggles to find energies these days with like Viridians if they really want to. Finding Pokemon, now that's actually something that is slightly difficult sometimes right now. So if your deck is calling out for more Pokemon search, this can be pretty nice. And getting a trainer card, this is one of the most tempting things because it can get you, part of a custom catcher, a combo. It can get you things like reset stamp late game. So maybe this is going to be one of these supporters that is just played in non-GX decks so that you can like recycle your next stage 1, get another energy, and then try and get a trainer to boot. I can see it, although it does feel worse than teammates. Like, if I'm thinking of something like a Breloom deck, for example, where your mid-game can just fizzle sometimes, now you have Roses to sort of, like, compete in that mid-game spot. I don't think it'll end up being, like, a high count in any decks, but if you play, like, 2 copies of this alongside Poker Gears, you can end up just, like, recycling your stage 1, and I think that's something that's kind of lacking in the format, so I think it does have, like, niche purposes right now, and will be interesting in that regard. Let me know what sort of decks you're going to try and use alongside Rosa. I think she'll overall be probably too poor to play in any GX-based decks because there's less windows of opportunities to use her. But in non-GX decks, it's potentially a lot more interesting. We have Clay, another supporter card that likes to discard things. I think they're really pushing discard mechanics in Pokemon right now. We have things like Hapu, we have Clay, we have Ends Resolve or whatever it is. So yeah, lots of discard stuff going on, which is really interesting because we have such terrible like recovery, no good Pokemon recovery, not great energy recovery either, that it is really risky to discard cards from the top of your deck these days. And Clay discards the top 7, which is definitely a big chunk, but you are able to reveal all item cards discarded and then put them into your hand instead. So it's like using a Bill's Analysis in many situations, and that's why I think this card is pretty terrible, to be honest. It reminds me of Bill's Analysis, because it's rare that you'll find more than 2 items in that top 7, unless your deck is super like full of item cards. So I think it's pretty risky to try and go down this route. There may be situations where this is better than Bill's Analysis, because you want to have discard synergy, get rid of excess energy cards, or other things like that, where it could be pretty handy for you, but I think that's pretty rare. Interesting to note that this could be pretty good for like an Aegislash archetype, although you're not actually discarding the item cards, you then get the items into your hand and then like try and insta-play them quickly. So it's technically like a Sycamore effect for exactly like the Aegislash archetype, which is quite fun. But I think this is a scary card to try and play. Item cards aren't that great right now. You've probably got to have an archetype with like really good item search to try and make this worthwhile. But it does help you dig deep to try and find things like custom catchers, reset stamps, like energy switches and tag switches if you're like Pika-Rom. Potentially this is like a card in that deck. Yeah, maybe Pika-Rom can try and find a space for this, because you have such good items in that deck. It's one of the decks that has like the best items in the game, and early on you want to get Lightnings in the bin anyway. Maybe a Pika-Rom card. Interesting. I'll have to play around with Clay. He feels pretty scary to use, but if you can actually have a deck with good enough items, he could be nice. Then we have Lily's Best Effort. Again, I think this is a supporter that gets named by some sort of Pokemon and gives it an extra effect, so something to bear in mind as we come across the other cards later on. But it allows you to draw 4 from your deck, and if you have 3 or more cards in your hand at the end of the turn, shuffle cards into your deck until you have 2 cards remaining. So, draw 4, no questions asked, is not bad. It helps you dig deeper into the deck and gives you good options overall, which isn't bad. And if you just have a lot of insta-playables off of those 4 cards, and you can get down to less than 3, you can have no downside. But also you can shuffle cards into your deck until you have 2 remaining. This can actually help out in certain situations, like if you're having to like Dedenne next turn or something like that, you can end up like shuffling back in 1 custom catcher that happens to be in your hand and sort of like protect it for a future turn. So it's not always strictly a downside that you're shuffling cards back into your deck, although you are like making it thicker and making you like draw those cards again, which isn't always great. But if you are playing something like the new Silvally GX, you don't mind that you go back down to a low hand size, because then you can get use out of his ability to get you back up to 5 cards. So I think Lily, at the very least, will probably see play in the new Silvally kind of style decks. And I can see it going in all sorts of other builds. Like, you don't actually care too much that you only have 2 cards going into your next turn, because a lot of the time you can have, like, Stellar Wish, you can have, because you're choosing the ones that you shuffle in, you'll end up at least having, like, a supporter for the following turn that you just end up just having to slam straight away and use that for the turn. So I think it's not a bad supporter overall. I don't think it's super strong, and I think you want to play it in a deck that already has like backup draw engine to get yourself back into a healthy hand size overall. Otherwise, you're going to be doing this weird cycle of just drawing 4 for turn and then shuffling some cards back in and trying to do the same thing the following turn. So again, it's one of these cards that probably isn't going to outweigh too many decks. The only thing I would say is that, like, comparing it to things like Erica, it's much safer on those opening turns than it is Erica. Whereas Erica's Hospitality is much stronger in the mid to late game. So it's one of these things where if you want to have better early game, the Lily might be the better shout. If your deck can sort of support that with other ability Pokemon in your list, whereas Erica is pretty dead on those opening turns, but gets a lot stronger. So that is it for the trainer cards. Let's jump into the Pokemon now, starting off with the grass stuff, and we come to our first GX straight away. It's the Vileplume GX, and as soon as I saw that there was a Vileplume coming out that had an ability, I was already scared because I thought Item Lock might be coming back. It's a 240 hit point, stage 2 grass type with 2 retreat, an ability, and 2 attacks. Its ability is Fragrant Flower Garden, which thankfully isn't Item Lock. Once during a turn, you may heal 30 from each of your Pokemon. That's a pretty good heal. It's like a Roxy's, but on a stage 2. Yeah, that's pretty rough. Does it push Alolan Eggs? Probably not. I think we already have the Lurantis that does minus 40, and I think oftentimes that will be better than Vileplume's healing, seeing as though we already have basic healing from Shaman. So I think this Vileplume pretty much is bad if you want to play it exclusively for its ability. Let's see if its attacks can pull it any further towards playability. For a Grass Colorless, we have a Big Bloom, 180, and it does 10 less for each damage counter on this Pokemon. So that's straight up terrible. 180 is not a good number to hit right now. You're only really knocking out things like Blacephalon, which you'll lose to anyway, because you're weak to fire and you're a stage 2. And you can knock out Dedenne, I guess. But everything else you can't knock out. And if you start getting damaged, you become useless. So I can see what they're going for. They have the ability and whatnot. There is a lot of healing in grass. You have Gardenia, you have this, that, and the other. But overall, 180 is like the big payoff is still very poor. And Allergy Bomb GX does 50, and your opponent's active is now poisoned, burned, and paralyzed. Status conditions are good. It's a cheap attack, but it's not all that impressive. It's not worth playing. Let's try and skim. I've skimmed through this stuff, but I'll reread as I go. My cargo doesn't seem great. Torkoal basically has a recovery of fire energies, but we have fire crystals, so who cares? We have a Weavile that is water type with dark energy attack costs. That's not all that relevant because it doesn't help many type coverage situations, I don't think. Something to bear in mind though. If the Slash Claw did more damage, it could be a tech card for like Dark Box because you're already playing a Weavile line. But I don't think that's all that great. You can search your deck for 2 cards and put them into your hand. Maybe if you're Dark Box and you want to stay non-GX for the opening few turns of the game, and you just go for a very thick 4 Sneasel plus Ditto count, and you try and play this. Probably not though, right? You still end up sacking a Dark Energy just to get 2 cards. That's not all that good. Yeah, it's not going to see play. We have a Piplup, which has 60 hit points and an energy cost of 3 water to do 80 damage, and if the defending Pokemon is a basic, it can't attack during opponent's next turn. Now you may think this is just a little Piplup, who cares about that? No one's going to give you the time to get 3 energies on him, just wait till you see the Empoleon. That's why I'll also talk you through the Prinplup, that's the stage 1, that also has a direct dive that discards all energy from this Pokemon to do 100 to one of your opponent's bench, so it's a pretty decent snipe. Again, for 3 water, no one's batting an eyelid, but when you come to the Empoleon, one of my favourite Pokemon by the way, they always treat Empoleon very well in the TCG. He's a 160 hit point stage 2 water type that has the attack Recall. For 1 colorless, you can choose an attack from this Pokemon's previous evolutions and use it as this attack. So now we go back to the Prinplup and most importantly the Piplup, to be honest, where for 1 colorless we can be doing 80, and if the defending Pokemon's a basic, they can't attack us. And that is really, really good and scary for the likes of Pikarom decks, Green's Rashizard, Mewtwo builds. Yeah, this is a scary attack. Yes, it's very difficult to try and get stage 2s online, and that's the biggest reason why Empoleon may end up flopping. But it may end up seeing play as just this walling deck where you just sit there and keep recalling Bubble Hold, and there will be decks that simply can't beat that attack. So that's definitely something to bear in mind. It also has the Aquafall attack for 2 colorless. You do 130 and discard all energy attached to him. So The deck has inbuilt sniping if you evolve into Primplups. It has inbuilt lock, and it has just a vanilla 130, which is enough to deal with like non-GX, like stage 1 threats a lot of the time. So that's pretty reasonable, you know. I think Empoleon is not terrible. I think one of the biggest drawbacks of this is we actually get another very good non-GX archetype that isn't all basics from this set, and that's the Raichu archetype, the Nuzzle deck. That probably keeps Empoleon in check just like from the get-go, because the Nuzzle deck seems like it'll definitely have legs. It's a stage 1 that has really, really good search from Emolga throughout the entire game, and it'll just absolutely body Empoleon. So pair that with the fact that Empoleon's kind of bricky a lot of the time makes me think this won't be great. But if the tag teams end up still dominating the format, that could open the door for Empoleon to be a nice rogue deck to sort of shut them down, which is pretty cool. We have a Wishy-Washy, which is a 180 hit point basic non-GX, which is very tanky. We're talking Regigigas levels here. And it has the ability Disperse, which is a really horrible affliction that it has, to be honest. If this Pokemon has any damage counters on it, flip a coin at the end of your opponent's turn. If tails, shuffle this Pokemon and all cards attached to it into your deck. Now, you may be thinking, well, if I'm going to try and be some sort of stalling archetype, I take a hit and then if I flip tails, that's the good outcome, and I heal my damage by getting back into the deck. But we have such terrible Pokemon search that it really sucks going back into the deck. You don't want that to happen at all. So yeah, that ability is hideous on the Wishy-Washy at the moment, because we don't have good Pokemon search. If we got something like the gold Brooklet Hill or whatever in this set, it might be a different story, because it's effectively a Regigigas that is a 50-50 of healing itself, which could be pretty interesting. But even then, Stall's not really a deck right now, in my book. You should just be playing Shedinja if you want to do something like that. We then have an Araquanid that doesn't really matter too much. And here's the Nuzzle deck that I was talking about. We have a 70 hit point Pikachu that has Nuzzle. Flip a coin if heads, your opponent's active is now paralyzed, but we more so care that it's literally the label Nuzzle, because it then means we can power it up with Pachirisu, and it means we can search it out with Dedenne. No, what was it? Emolga, that one. So that Pikachu is pretty nice. Bear in mind, I believe there's still a promo Pikachu that does have Nuzzle in set as well, in format. And that is Elmable, and that may be the best course of action, because you want to guarantee a big board to start using Pachirisu with it. So this may not end up being the Pikachu that we use, but regardless, it's another Nuzzle option that we have, which is nice. And then we have this Raichu. It's a 120 hit point stage 1. It also has Nuzzle, which is huge. It's really a big upgrade compared to the Raichu GX that we had, because the Raichu GX wasn't searchable. Obviously, we had like Ultra Ball and stuff back then, but it would be a way bigger issue in Standard now. But now that this has Nuzzle, we can thankfully Emolga for it, which is awesome. And it has the powerful Spark Attack for just 1 Lightning Energy. You do 20 times the amount of Lightning attached to your Pokemon, which is amazing. You have Pachirisu, and you have Tapu Koko, Prism Star, to try and accelerate this. And we're just going to try and swarm the board of energy cards and start swinging. I think there have been some successful energy sort of swarming decks in the past. There's been Turbo Dark, there's been Xerneas Break, which was one of my favorite pet decks for a while. And obviously the Raichu GX build that we saw from Shining Legends never really did much, but this has a much better chance of doing well, because it's a non-GX, and its only attack cost is 1, so when it goes down, it's not a big deficit. You only lose 20 damage, and you can replenish that literally by attaching for turn. So it's promising. I think in a world of tag teams, this isn't great, just off the bat, because the health is just so high these days. And the amount of healing options that we have is actually pretty reasonable with the mixed herbs and the great potions. I'm looking at things like Charizard and just thinking, man, that's probably going to just stomp the Raichu, because they're going to put pressure on from the get-go. They can just like GX attack straight out of the game and just keep attacking with Flare Strike and whatnot, and then just heal off damage turn by turn. That feels like it could be rough. So tag teams may keep this in check. I don't think the damage cap goes high enough to be a huge threat. But I think it'll be a relatively, probably the most consistent non-GX evolving deck out there, which is pretty cool. And it does, if anything's going to succeed for energy acceleration, it'll be lightning, because you have Coco, Prism, and stuff to help you push a little bit further, which is nice, so something to bear in mind. We have a Magneton that has the Beacon ability. Once during a turn, you may choose up to 3 supporter cards from your deck, reveal them and put them into your hand, and then knock this Pokemon out. I don't think this is any good. I've never really liked cards that knock themselves out. I think that's pretty bad for the majority of archetypes that want to trade prize cards. So that's not fantastic. One cool shout out to it, though, is that it does end up scouting effectively 120 damage if you're going to try and play the Slowpoke Psyduck deck. And because that's predominantly tag team based, that could be like your version of Miss Magius. You know how Guardy Sylveon played Miss Magius or whatever. You could play Magnetons in the Slowpoke Psyduck deck and use these to sort of replenish your damage output, which could be pretty cool. But overall, I think that's pretty much a pipe dream, to put it nicely, I guess. But some synergy there, I guess. I really don't think it's that strong of a card, because you never really need 3 supporters in your hand, right? Like, you need 1, probably. That's not much else. We then have a Solgaleo and Lunala tag team. It's a Psychic type, 270 hit point basic that has a pretty hefty couple of attacks here. The first one is Cosmic Burn for 3 Psychic and a Colorless. This Pokemon can't use Cosmic Burn during your next turn, so it's pretty much Flare Strike, but for Psychic Energy cards. And then we have Light of the Goddess for 2 Psychic and a Colorless, which is pretty efficient. You do 200, and if you played that Lily's Best Effort card, the one that I talked about earlier, from your hand, during your opponent's next turn, prevent all effects of attacks, including damage, done to each of your Pokemon. Each of your Pokemon? That means your opponent can't even gust around this and sort of like negate the effect or whatever, and still try and take some prizes that turn. It's like you've played a Lusamine Prism Star for that turn. So Lily's Best Efforts is going to be a strong card, and it may bring about another build of Malamar, believe it or not, where you try and play Solgaleo and Lunala, because Cosmic Burn is really good damage if you just try and use things like Spell Tag on some other non-GXs in those opening turns, or if you use things like Mew even, that can be really nice for you. So I think this is sort of better than using it in a Reshizard deck, because you're doing Reshizard output, right? But you have the spell tags and a few other like Psychic Trickery type cards to get that damage over the line against GXs. It is weak to Psychic on his own end, but bear in mind we still have that Jirachi, so that's always fine. And that Light of the Goddess attack is really strong. That GX attack is really strong. And it's the first plus style GX attack that we see that doesn't actually require plus energy cost. It's a plus specific supporter card, which is a really interesting avenue. And I think that will make some of the GX attacks in future a lot more playful, which I think is really cool, because just saying like, oh, slap an extra energy on for like an extra amount of damage is getting a bit stale now. So I do like the fact that tag teams are going down this different direction with the plus route for their GX attacks, which is really cool. And if you're playing a Malamar style deck, it is quite bad to use Lily's Best Efforts, I will say. You'd rather play some like discard synergy cards, or just like have some Ericas or whatever, but I could see you playing like 3 copies in this deck, just to try and use it with a GX attack and have that immunity for a turn, because that's a pretty huge deal. Here's the Coughing, that's meant to be the salvation of the Wheezing archetype, because, man, people just love playing Detention Gas Wheezing for whatever reason. But this Coughing, 60 hit points, has the Blast Bomb ability. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon is discarded by the effect of Roxy, you may put 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's Pokemon. So you probably don't want to do that, because you will run out of attackers if you end up discarding him with Roxy, which is pretty terrible. One fun thing that I forgot to mention about Roxy is like it can end up being like a Kukui in many ways. You could Kukui and draw 6 cards if you have the high roll of discarding Coughings, which has that's like a big selling point, I guess you could say. And it could be like a great math fixer. It could be a pretty like hilarious engine where people are just playing 4 Coughings and 4 Roxy in decks to be math fixers. Like we've seen Shrine go into GX decks, like again, Green's Reshizard play Shrine right now, just to help get over the line in certain matchups. And we are lacking damage modifiers that much that Roxy could end up seeing play for that reason alone. So Coughing's pretty funny. I don't think, like I said, it doesn't bring back Wheezing in any way because we have terrible Pokemon recovery or whatever. So you actually don't want your Coughings to be discarded ever. But as like a weird Kukui type package, it's pretty funny. I don't think many decks will have space for it though. But it's a pretty like fun thing to think about. The Wheezing also has Blast Bomb. So yeah, it puts 1 counter on each of your opponent's Pokemon as well. So if you want to add consistency to your Kukui style effects, you can add in Wheezing as well. But I think their attacks are not good enough to be their own deck, so they would just be discard fodder. We have a Xatu, which has Life Drain, and it has the infamous text, flip a coin. So remember that when we were talking about the Will supporter earlier. If heads, put damage counters on your opponent's active until its remaining hit points is 10. And maybe you try and play this alongside Will and like spell tags and stuff like that. Or get creative with some status conditions or something. Shrine as well is obviously an option. But I still think it's pretty poor. It's a 2 energy attack cost on a non-GX. It does have decent searchability with Treasure, but not every turn, like most turns you won't be able to use Will because you end up having to use a supporter to draw cards to get yourself more energy cards, your next Natu, your next Xatu, stuff like that. So I think this is glamorous but pretty poor. We have a cool Gallade line. We have the Ralts, the Curlier, and the Gallade here. 160 hit point, stage 2, with the ability double type. As long as this Pokemon is in play, it's both a Psychic and Fighting type. That's pretty cool. Gaining that Fighting typing can help with Diancie Prism Star. It then pushes Power Cyclone from 120 to 140, which is a super, super relevant number because now you, with Weakness, can knock out a Mewtwo, and it means you can knock out the Raichu, whereas previously you could only knock out a Pikarom. So pushing that 20 is a pretty big deal. It also means that you get over the line of damage to deal with things like Giratinas and other non-GXs, which is pretty cool. I think regardless, you'd probably lose to Malamar just with Giratinas because of that awkward psychic weakness that we have and the fact that they can like spell tag on top of that. So I think that's a little bit awkward for you. Also is awkward that you just have a 2 energy attack cost, 120. Even though you are moving one to your bench, it's still a little bit awkward. I think you just about get away with it because of that text where you move an energy from yourself to the bench. Because in theory, you're always like you're only losing one, so you save an attachment every time. But there's still those like opening turns where you have to find attachments and whatnot. But I think it might just about get away with it. We have good searchability, thanks to Treasure. But I don't know, something still tells me that this might not see play. Its typing is so strong though. It just feels like Stage 2s don't have the space or consistency to play stamps and customs, and those are just such big selling points in this format right now. So although his typing is cool, his raw damage output is reasonable thanks to Diancie. I'm still a little bit concerned for some reason. Maybe there's something else that I'm missing for this card. But it could play Black Belt as well, I guess, because it's technically a fighting type when it's in play to reduce that attack cost. Undecided on this Gallade. Undecided. I don't think it's bust, but like it definitely can help fight off Pikarom and Mewtwo if those are 2 of the top decks in the format. But it'll always be kept in check by Mali anyway, so probably just another one of these like anti-meta tier 2, 3 kind of decks. Mimikyu has Impersonate, but you have to commit energy, so that's bad. Onyx, we have a really interesting Excadrill that has 11th hour tackle. You do 30, and if you have 3 or less cards in your deck, you do 150 more. So 180 for 1 on a fighting type is pretty reasonable. And the way that you get down to 3 or fewer cards in your deck is just by using Drill Bazooka the entire game, 120, and discard the top 4 of your deck. You can see what they're going for. They're trying to get super creative with this discard, but that is obviously terrible. You don't need me to say. The discarding top 4 cards of your deck every turn is just suicide for the most part because we have such terrible recovery. We then have a Seismitoad. It's a stage 2 fighting type that has Smooth Over, the same ability as Magcargo, and obviously you won't play this over Magcargo because it's a stage 2. There is Maxis, of course, which is pretty fun. You can Maxis into a Seismitoad, which is something to bear in mind for Expanded. It has the Tremor Fist attack, but it's super expensive, fighting in 3 colorless, 80 and 30 to each of your opponent's bench with damage counters on them. Yeah, it doesn't sound good. We have a Steelix, which also has a bunch of energies attached to it for attacks. Clefairy as well. We go on to the Reshiram and Zekrom GX. Now, this is a card right here. This is a definite threat. Will certainly be the big poster boy selling point tag team, I think, of our set when it comes out in English. 270 hit point Dragon type, weak to Fairy. Has these 2 attacks. The first is Thunder Flame Dream for a fire and lightning. You do 90. Discard up to 3 in any combination of fire and lightning energy cards from your benched Pokemon. This does 90 for each card discarded in this way. So, ever heard of Naganadel? Well, yeah, that's basically how you're going to try and fuel this deck, I imagine. Just by kitting it out with that Ends Resolve supporter, as well as a bunch of Nagas. You will end up just continuing to charge up turn by turn, and that will be the fuel for Thunder Flame Dream, because the full discard of 3 energy is 270 damage. Pretty nuts. Pretty nuts. Yeah, this is going to be really insano strong. Every other tag team struggles to knock out tag teams. Like, compared to this, the best alternative we have right now is a 5 energy Mewtwo or a 6 energy Reshizard. Now we have this that just goes for 2 energy. I guess I'm doing this pretty easily. Yeah, that's nuts. Truly, truly nuts. This card is super good. And it's GX attack for 2 fire and 2 lightning. If your Ends Resolves have gone very well, you can do 170 to one of your opponent's bench, and if you played an Ends Resolve from your hand during this turn, 170 to another of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Oh, cool. So that one Ends Resolve goes haywire, and suddenly you're doing a Tag Bolt, basically, but for 2 bench targets. Obviously, this can be walled out by Mew, and if Pikarom continues to be good, it will be walled out by Mew, but let's be honest, Thunderflame Dream is still the selling point in this deck, and if you're ever able to cross-break GX, you're going to be in an insane position already, so I think this deck basically will just function with high treasure count, high Naga count, some energy switches so you can make sure you can chain Thunderflame Dream, and yeah, you're pretty much good to go. Just get the new Ends Resolve in there, and that's pretty insane. Also, bear in mind, this is even like welderable and stuff like that if you really need to get towards that cross-break GX more like realistically. But I think its first attack is, to be honest, the selling point, so I don't think you even need to play welders or anything like that. You can just play a more conventional support account with the N in there as well. So yeah, that's an absolutely nuts card. Definitely the strongest card that I've seen so far. And finally, there's the Stoutland line. Maybe, oh, not quite finally. There's also a good GX here. But yeah, Stoutland is a 150 hit point stage 2 that has the ability Fierce Bark. Once during a turn, when you play this card, from your hand to evolve a Pokemon, you may discard an energy from your opponent's active. So we've heard that sort of line of text before on some stage 1s. We have it on like Lycanroc GX still in formats. We've had it on things like Crawdaunt previously. The upside of this being on a stage 2 is that we have this additional couple of lines of text that says, if this Pokemon is your active and is knocked out by damage from an opponent's attack, you may discard an energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. So you're getting them once with the first bark, and then when you get knocked out, you're trying to make it hard for them. Usually, though, that's not that great, you know. The damage output of this attack is only 110, even though you can use it for a 3 CE. You do 30 to one of the opponent's bench, but you can only use 3 CE so many times. You're going to have to try and weave in like welders to your own deck to make sure you can keep attacking turn by turn. So that's very awkward. You're a stage 2 that you need to try and reload the entire time. 110 damage is truly pitiful against tag teams, and there's not any good damage modification for colorless types. So yeah, its ability is glamorous, but won't see any play. We have a type null. Is it going to be better than the other type nulls that we have? Probably not. No, probably not. But the Sylvalai, man, this is a good card. It's a 210 hit point. Stage 1 with the ability Disc Reload. Once during your turn, you may draw cards from your deck until you have 5 cards in your hand. So it is Octillery that's back, but now in the form of a 210 hit point GX that has the potential to attack as well. So that's already good card, just because you're a tanky artillery that won't get picked off as easily. And it has the Buddy Brave attack for 2 colors, 50, and if you play the supporter from your hand during your turn, this does 70 more damage. So that's the Gallade effect, basically, that used to be a sensitive blade, right? But it was the other way around, I believe. I can't remember though. But yeah, 120, decent kind of like vanilla attack. 2 colorless cost is relatively cheap, depending on kind of what you play this in. If you play it with Welders, or if you play it with the other Silver Ally that has energy acceleration, you could end up trying to use this here and there just to finish things off. And it also has the White Knight GX attack for 2 colors again. If your opponent's active is an Ultra Beast, it just knocks it out straight away. So if Ultra Beasts remain relevant, again, having just a nice 1-hit KO option. It's like the Sublimation GX attack, right, from Alolan Ninetales GX. But now with colorless attack cost, so it's much more flexible in whatever deck you're playing. So it's, like I said, just a flexible answer against Ultra Beast to knock out just instantly an Ultra Necrozma or a Blacephalon or something like that. So that's pretty cool. I think his attacks aren't good enough to be like Zoroark worthy. I guess this is one of the cards that I saw kind of like compared to Zoroark straight out of the gate, because people are harping back to the fact that this does 120 pretty much every turn and can draw you cards with its ability. I personally don't think it's good enough to be like a Zoroark anymore in this big tag team meta. There's obviously the other Silver Ally that we do still have in format that can have the Dangerous Rogue GX attack involved, which is pretty cool. There is 3 Cs available, so maybe we end up seeing a Silver Ally like split archetype becoming a thing. We lost some of the most relevant memories, unfortunately, for Silver Ally to be super good right now. But this Silver Ally is definitely like a strong ability. I can see there being like a 4 type null and then like 2/2 split of Silver Allies or whatnot going on in certain decks. And I can see this having a bunch of partners as well. I'll straight up say that this is definitely worse than Zoroark. But I still think he's pretty strong. Like, he's still definitely going to see a lot of play. Artillery saw a lot of play just being like teched into stuff. Part of that reason though was because we had Brooklet Hill to actually find Remoraid super easily, and we don't have that same search ability for type nulls. The other like argument to say is that both Silver Allies are useful. So even if you have like a 4/4 line of Silver Ally in your deck, you can then use them for retreating, a big knockout GX attack available, and drawing cards. And that's a lot of things in one package. So I could see people building a heavy Silver Ally deck with X other cards to help out the relevant matchups in the format. Like, you can try and play Silver Ally with fighting stuff. You can try and play it with fire stuff. You can try and play it with all these other like techs or whatever, to just try and get through whatever relevant decks are out there. So I think Silver Ally will end up being the face of some archetypes, I think. Yeah, and end up also being like a 2/2 line just to be that same artillery that we know from way back when. So pretty interesting cards from this set. I think the clear winner of the best card of the set goes to that Reshiram and Zekrom tag team. I think that's absolutely absurd. The Silver Ally is also very good. Nothing else has been super impressive. I like the meme potential of Coughing alongside Roxy. Solgaleo Lunala, not as terrible as it looks out the gate. The Raichu probably doesn't have enough damage to keep up with the tag teams, but could be pretty good. Empoleon, a very annoying wall for decks that don't have the answers. And that's really it for the most important Pokemon. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed my first impressions of Dream League. Let me know if there was anything that I misread, forgot to read, or misinterpreted, or whatever. I'll get that in the discussion down below. That's kind of the reason why we have these first impressions, because I can get my initial thoughts out there, and then when it comes to the English set release, I can be a lot more... well, I can commit more time to the set, really, because it's much more relevant for us at that point. But at least getting to touch base on these cards is a nice starting point, and you get to see my thoughts on the initial set. Definitely an interesting one. Will be a nice part of the future couple of sets. Honestly, I am pretty worried about the one-hit KO potential of that Reshi Zek, but it has fairy weakness, and there's a few cool fairy cards out there that can maybe help deal with it, and at the end of the day, it's still a big tag team that you can get through, so who knows, maybe it's going to be fine. But I'll hear your discussion down below. Let me know your favourite card of this set. Let me know what you want to get testing, and all that good stuff. So thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll be back tomorrow with some Unified Mind stuff. Cheers.